On the 31st of August 1989, 2 decades and a bit more ago, I was an Army lieutenant in the Royal Australian Army Educational Corps, and I'd gone absent without leave about a week before I jumped down onto the floor of Parliament House, the House of Representatives. I had it in my heart that as an officer who had pledged himself to fight and possibly die for the freedom and liberties of this country, that I was concerned that the freedoms and liberties and the actual practice of democracy as we have come to know it was deeply flawed. I jumped down onto the floor with a brown envelope in which these words I'm about to read to you, among other things as proofs and evidences, hoping that I might be able to broadcast them to the Parliament. Of course that didn't happen. And now, decades later, I consider these words still relevant, and they begin with some of the words from the American War of Independence. Indeed, I had a dream a week ago in which some of the founding fathers of America had come to me. They had risen up out of their graves, and they had told me and shown me their utter contempt and disgust at the practice of politics, not only in America but generally throughout the whole world. Thomas Jefferson said to me, a famous quote too, that what he had feared was not standing armies but the banking institutions. And indeed, he added, their union with government was the greatest evil that the people in a free world and in a democratic world had to contend with, and this is the issue that many of us are now waking up and realising. Anyway, let me read these words, and I want you to consider whether they are still relevant today on this, the 8th of March 2014. On democracy and revolution. The quote comes initially from Winston S. Churchill's book, A History of the English-Speaking People, Volume 3, 1958, page 154. Many of you, particularly those of you that are Americans, will know these words. When, in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind require that they should declare the causes which impel them to separation. In brackets I've added, and what follows in this essay are, in my mind, the causes. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter, to abolish, and to institute new government, laying its foundations on such principles and organising its powers in such forms to them that shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. 200 years ago, two nations, France and America, were engaged in a war of revolution to free them from the tyranny of corrupt and outmoded government. While freedom was struggling to be born in these countries, Australia was becoming a jail, a place of imprisonment, for many were convicted here under Britain's draconian laws. From the very beginning of our European history, human rights were violated, and today throughout the world, the basic principles of civil liberties that were won by and large through the American Revolution are in the main lost. Yet the words born of revolution cry out even more urgently to be heard today in a world that increasingly brutalises us as individuals. On June 3rd to 4th, 1989, the Weekend Australian published this editorial. It says, or it said, "The government is out of touch with the people's aspirations. It doesn't represent the interests of the people. It rejects the people's most basic and moderate requests. It even refuses to enter into a dialogue with the people, and when the deadlock appears complete, it is willing to declare war on the people." I've put in brackets my thoughts. The people have indeed lost the confidence of the government. The government has decided to dissolve the people and appoint another. Well, these aren't my words. I see here they're the words of Bertolt Brecht. What a revolution requires in order to succeed is not great intelligence on the revolutionary side, but sufficient stupidity on the sides of the government. The government should emanate from the people. It should remain accountable to the people, and it should be possible for the people to revoke the government's mandate. Democracy does not merely mean to follow the will of the majority, it also entails respect for the rights of the minority to dissent, and more fundamentally it should be based on the respect of human rights. The regime maintains itself because of the absence of a substitute. It has run out of ideas. It's incapable of taking imaginative initiative. It is hollow, dead, and brittle inside. These comments made in that issue of the Weekend Australian strike me now as being increasingly relevant. I continue. Although these comments were directed at the Chinese government, I believe the same criticisms can be levelled at our government. They may not shoot us, but they do ignore us and remain out of touch, and this is something I wish to explore. I wonder how many voters believe that government, whether Liberal, National or Labor, represent and serve the aspirations and will of the Australian people. Are we as a people able to participate in government and enter into dialogue and the decision-making process that adequately reflects our needs, feelings and ideas and thoughts in the management of Australia? We are constantly subjected to the opinion and rhetoric of politicians. We are assaulted by their words whenever we open a newspaper, turn on a radio or switch on a TV. But how approachable is our government? Do they really listen to us? Are they accountable to the people? Do they respect human rights? Have they run out of ideas, initiative and lack vision? Do they remain in power because of the lack of a viable alternative? Right now we are a society in crisis in a world in even greater crises. We are suffering a crisis of confidence, a loss of national will, a creeping, lonely impotence, a loss of faith in each other and in our values and institutions. Are we to lose the creative force that can take us forward together in an act of political will that can begin the healing of the body politic that is, in essence, you and me? Democracy and revolution are concerned with two fundamental opposites: freedom versus tyranny. Freedom is democracy working out its principles in the lives of individuals who have power to direct their own lives for the good of themselves and for all others in our society. And indeed, I might add now, in our world. Tyranny is subjection and servitude to rulers who don't believe in the people and who, centralising power, control, number, coerce, manipulate and legislate against the people, all without our consent, while they distance themselves in their ever-increasing arrogances. Democracy was born in Athens. Athens defined democracy as being a way of life based on tolerance, understanding, open-mindedness, public persuasion or participation, and fair persuasion and argument. These qualities came about because Athens respected individuals, and it was upon these qualities that civilized life blossomed. The Athenians knew that democracy rested in the sum total of all her citizens, and in the well-spoken word accompanied by right action in the context of the community. Whenever violence occurred, it was a sign that reasonable speech and thought was lost, and democracy had for that moment failed. Democracy, I believe, can never in the end fail, for it rests upon the principle that man is born free with basic unalterable God-given rights that are as much a need as food, water and air. Democracy will always seek full expression, and even more so when in the face of rising tyranny. Modern Western revolutionary tradition is essentially Christian in origin because Christ taught us to love one another, to seek and respect the authority of God above the power of men, and to work for, trust and have faith in an emerging better world. Christ was the revolutionary in his time. He challenged, disturbed, shook up, polarised and began a catalyst of change that even today influences our world. We pride ourselves on being a democratic society whose values are Christian, and this is reflected in our law, government, authority, and in the armed forces. It is clear today that the Christian and democratic tradition has become rigid, hypocritical, and hollow. We don't practice what we preach, and our leaders have become stiff-necked, proud, and as arrogant as the Pharisees who murdered Christ 2,000 years ago. We are all born with the right and need for individual self-determination. Some may consider freedom a vague word, but it really means that we should be free to discover and love ourselves and each other in the act of becoming all we can be in a society whose moral and ethical codes support and nurture the beauty and the diversity of the individual. Freedom never seeks to dominate, control and manipulate the minds of others. Freedom may be a dangerous thing, but it is a better thing than the tyranny. For tyranny robs people, brings repression, breeds unhappiness and destroys the rights of the person named you and named me. Democratic freedom is the only thing that can awaken Australia. It seeks unity in all our differentness. It seeks to stir the public spirit, enthuse the public imagination, open the public heart, and nurture public well-being. Democracy recognises all people regardless of race, creed, colour, religion and belief, and seeks to bring us all together in a celebration of harmony at work. The whole point of democracy is this. Democracy is struggling to be born in the only place it can be born. Democracy is seeking to express itself and to evolve into its next stage of development. Democracy can only find the room to move in a nation that has guarded its freedom and has not yet been broken, beaten or corrupted into submission by tyranny, for its people are strong in their contempt and cynicism of authority. Its people are fair and tolerant. They have opened their country to others. The people of this womb of democracy are irreverent towards sacred cows. They are intelligent, well-read, and love their land. They are a people ready to act. Democracy wants to stir in the hearts of such a people, and after endless ridicule, violation, argument, perversion and failure, democracy wants to be born in such a way that this nation, destined to be the midwife of democratic freedom, can give birth to itself and lead the world. I believe that this caretaker of the next plateau of democracy is Australia. We shall become a law unto ourselves and hold a light high in a dark world. I'm considering now, some 20 years later, that democracy really needs to be born among all of us who now see ourselves as citizens of this planet Earth. And that is first and foremost. Democracy seeks to excel and to bring out the best in the true wealth of any land and country. and that wealth is its people. Democracy despises all censors, agencies and forms of government that try to control, influence and deceive the people. Democracy upholds that freedom of thought is the highest activity of the human mind, and that suppression of the freedom to act on thought that is right is the greatest harm that can be done to the individual. Democracy encourages intelligence and reasoned dissent. It doesn't feel threatened by dissent, but recognises the need to be heard. A democracy has open ears, open eyes and an open mind. It listens and acts accordingly. A slave is someone who has lost his or her liberty of thought and whose opinions and attitudes are the same as everybody else around them. Short-sighted politicians and clergy may think that uniformity of belief and dogma constitute reason, harmony and peace, but historically this conformity breeds mediocrity and downgrades the human spirit, and that spirit is the seat of the divine, of God within us all. There are no greater thieves than those who would indoctrinate us, rob us of our thoughts and the right to follow our consciences. Democracy recognises no state or authority that legislates against its people without their consent, numbers its people causing loss of individuality, taxes them unfairly, robs them of their money and denies the basic right to peaceable order, dignity and self-determination, in whatever ways these things seek expression for the benefit of one and all. Democracy is the fundamental law of the people serving each other, deciding together and remaining accountable to one another while constituting a government that meets their needs, their hopes, their wishes, always for a better private and public life. A truly democratic government encourages the people to retain, participate in and exercise their power in the direction and regulation of their country, not just merely vote on election day and then go away surrendering their power to elected representatives in the hope that they can be trusted. Perhaps we would be happy to do this if we really had faith in those we elect, but that faith in elected representatives has worn thin for too long. They have harmed us with their policies, and oh, how many broken promises litter the road to politics. Another election is looming, and we are to be subjected to the same litany of inflated egos, empty words, handouts, hollow promises, and the greedy clamouring for votes. Now more than ever we must exercise the third option of democracy, the right to not vote for any politician and to vote for ourselves. A vote for ourselves is a vote for the people and for Australia. It is the act of democracy and the first step in putting right the wrong and ensuring that we, the people, are heard. Just an aside, I remember now that what I wanted to voice in the next coming election, then in '89 if I remember, was to write across the ballot paper Australia. A vote that's not counted void, but if there were sufficient numbers with Australia across the ballot paper, would that not be a vote in itself? Some may say this is a foolish, dangerous and naive, but is it any more foolish that the state of decay and betrayal that is so readily apparent? There is an urgent need for real change, for a concerted and deliberate effort that begins an act of healing and divisiveness of our troubled land, that begins as an act of healing the divisiveness of our troubled land. Government today lacks initiative, vision and the broad perspective of understanding and cooperation. They lack the needed honesty and integrity because they're too busy fighting for power while serving financial and vested alliances that are damaging Australia. The earth is wounded, the weather is changing, species are dying, families are falling apart, children destitute in our streets, high interest rates are forcing people out of their homes and off the land, businesses are closing, the dollar is losing value, we're selling Australia to foreign investors, crime is rising, violence escalating, there is industrial chaos, lost productivity, rising prices, injustice and hypocrisy is rife in this land. All of these things demand a resolution. They will not go away with any magic J-curve, formula or wish. They will only go away if we recognise we are all responsible for the problems of Australia, and only together we can solve them. The answer is in a proper democratic revolution. Revolution is an act of restoration, a binding, a coming together, a building of bridges towards each other guided by the spirit of democracy. This is the freedom of self-determination, the freedom to participate in government, the freedom to meet together and explore all options openly and honestly, the right to vindicate ourselves and to restore purpose, meaning and direction, coupled with the urge to live fruitful and productive lives. Revolution is change. It must be an ongoing thing, just as the earth revolves around the sun, so a people revolve around its society. Remember the lessons of history. All armed and violent insurrections end in death. We cannot justly bear arms in Australia, for we have not fully explored the avenues of peace available to us, and this is our hope. There is room for mediation and negotiation, unlike so many other countries in the world. Let our greatest weapon be reason, common sense, strategy, a peaceable, disciplined outlook that is based on persistence and determination to seize the day that Australia changes direction for the better. That day is soon coming. Revolution is the renewal of changing and growing hearts and minds that come together in the ballot box and vote for unity. Revolution is people finding their voices, their courage, and their will together, hand in hand to lead Australia in the right direction. The guidelines for democratic rights and conventions are already part of Australian law. We can thank the Whitlam government for this active vision. In 1973, Whitlam incorporated into Australian law the International Covenant for Civil and Political Rights, 1966. This covenant is protected by Section 51, paragraph 29, the external affairs of the Australian Constitution. It is according to law that I act and speak as I do. Incidentally, democracy is not mentioned in the Australian Constitution. I feel that it is time to write it in. Now, the freedom I'm speaking about has nothing to do with the me-first mentality so prevalent in our society. This selfishness has infected us all, and it keeps us apart and divided. When one speaks from the heart, it can be moving. Our times are rampant with argument, litigation, disagreement, unreasonableness, pettiness, and the failure to adequately communicate in such a way that both sides find resolution. We have drawn into our own selves, into our narrow interests, into the private world of our own thoughts. As we retreat further and further into our obsessive selves, outward freedom is slipping away, and our sensibilities become numb. Our hearts grow distant and cold while we surrender our dreams and ideals to fear and impotences. Yet we must now become involved, because your trouble is my trouble, and the earth and all of us together are now in trouble. Are we to remain muted spectators, entranced by the illusions and toys that distract us from the real relationship to each other and to all that is natural? Would we be in trouble? Would our society be seen to be falling apart if we were more open, compassionate, caring, tolerant, flexible, cooperative, and really, truly reasoned in all the affairs that govern our daily lives? Nothing shall be won while we stand toe-to-toe in our indifferences, in our antagonisms to each other. A house divided against itself, a nation divided among its people, the national injustice of the path of downfall. This is the lesson and voice of history speaking. I am not proposing a perfect society, rather the right to evolve into a more open and fairer society that seeks to practice common sense, decency, a cultured outlook and a peaceable temper while learning to cooperate with one another. We must realise that our frailties, imperfections and mistakes are simply learning steps, and that we can, if we want to, settle our differences by discussion, consensus and willingness to explore things together. The enemy we face is firstly inside ourselves. It is our rigidity, our narrow-mindedness, our frightened arrogances, our frail egos, our doubt, our childish pettinesses. After all, our conflicts and opinions won't matter much if the earth is irreparably damaged. We need to resist the urge to argue our opinions. It would be better to think them out and to argue within the arena of our own minds, curbing emotions, and then, when we are still within, bring our concerns out in the open as we seek reasonable discussion and reconciliation. The fault we see in others is so often the fault we fail to see in ourselves. The answer is the writing of me in harmony with you in the context of a society and a world now learning to come together. We are the people in all our diversity. The same colour blood flows in our veins. We feel the same pain, the same frustrations, the same hurts, angers and pains when we feel wronged. We share the same needs for decent, useful, meaningful lives, and Australia, if properly managed, can meet all our needs with enough to spare. I believe in democratic capitalism, but if our economy is to be put right, it must stand on an ethical footing that cares for the people, values the labour of the people, and rewards the people who are the source of all productivity. Our economics must also care for the earth and seek to develop industries that use renewable resources and put back more than they take. Australia is a land of plenty, and the greatest resource is the imagination of the people who can see the point in working together to create a prosperous, viable, sound and progressive nation. It is also time for Australia to hold its head high and to stop kowtowing to international profiteers who want to milk our land and take the honey away. We are not yet a true democracy. And adding now, today, the 8th of March 2014, nowhere in the world do I see such a democracy. And we can't expect government as we know it to lead the way, for they are as lost as we are. The burden must be shared by the people. We need to take back the reins of power off the few and place it in the hands of the people inspired to right action. Let a revolution begin and be won by the Australian people. Let a revolution begin. Let a momentum gather and throw up the leaders who only care for the people, for the country and for doing what is right. Let the people come together, and so many problems that now seem insurmountable can be solved by the people's imagination and initiative. Let a revolution begin in the ballot box and in a gathering in front of Parliament House, and it will open deaf ears, loosen dumb tongues, restore sight to the blind. Don't listen to those who have lost the power to act and dream, for they are dead inside. All things that are have first begun in the thought and fertility of imagination. The need is there, and we must tap the creative power of a cultivated and determined political will working for one common purpose. What better purpose than the righting of our nation, the setting of the keel that is the ship of Australia as we say boldly into the 21st century. And aside now, for all of us as citizens of this planet Earth, to respond to the birth pain of democracy is our duty. To rescue the future for living things is our duty. To awaken inside and become unified while rooting out fear, anger, hatred, bitterness, bigotry, greed and corruption is our duty. We have a duty to gather the political will and the hope that right is might, while seeking in the end to dare to do our duty as we understand it and to the best of our abilities. Estusis, LT, Estusis, Ingleburn Area Officers Mess, 10th of August, 89. Well, folks, what do you think?